Tabletop Squadron Con 2020, the year we didn't go to Gen Con, so we did an online con. I'd like to welcome Brioni Russell and Melissa DeGenova. They're going to be doing the Running Games for Neurodivergent Players panel. So plug your things and we'll get this started.
Want to go first? Or?
Hi, I'm Briony Russell, she, her. I am on this panel because I am a neurodivergent person myself. I'm on the autism spectrum. I am also a transgender woman and a game GM, player, and occasionally designer.
I'm Melissa DeGenova. I have ADHD, so I've got experience that I bring with me, and I also have about 10 years of experience working as a caregiver to adults and teens with developmental and intellectual disabilities. I'm a part of a regular gaming group where most of the other gamers also fall somewhere on either the autism spectrum or have other diagnoses. And I also run games for adults with developmental disabilities at the group home where I work. So I think we're going to start off. We're going to get the crunch out of the way real quick with just throwing out some vocabulary, because we just used a bunch of words and not all of them might be ones that you're familiar with.
Right.
So we're going to queue up real short PowerPoint. Oh, no, wait, that's not what I am supposed to do. I'm supposed to share my screen first. No, I don't want that. There we go.
There it is.
So I want to start off with explaining what the idea of neurodiversity is. Basically, it's the idea that differences in individual brain function and behaviors are part of the natural range of variation. There should be an oven there. I'm sorry about that typo. But basically that these diagnoses like autism, like ADHD, all of these things, they're not something that's necessarily weird or apart from normal. They're just things that have always cropped up naturally throughout history. It is an idea that frames these developmental differences and cognitive differences as just something that's natural. Also focuses on that they're not something that necessarily needs to be cured or fixed. It's that accommodations might be needed to help that person be successful. And again, this kind of can include autism, ADHD, dyslexia, mental health issues, and intellectual disabilities, which I should probably mention that's variation in like basically intelligence. IQ was the sort of older way of breaking it down. You might hear the term, this is a really antiquated term, and I hate the term low functioning. You will hear that thrown out by other people, but basically, yeah, that side of it. Neurodiversity is also a push for people of all cognitive and developmental abilities to be accepted, respected, and included in every aspect of society, whether that be your school systems, whether that be the workplace, full access to the community, full participation. It's a part of the social model of disability. And in this model, disability comes not from the diagnosis, but from the way that society is organized. So society is set up to accommodate a specific set of people, and it doesn't necessarily, it's when people who have different levels of needs run up against that we see disability. So for example, I have ADHD. Society has decided to set up learning environments as a person sitting still at a desk all day, taking notes. And one of the traits of ADHD is I cannot focus if I'm sitting still for long periods of time. It does not work. So when the trait of my not being able to focus for a long period of time clashes up against that way society has set up schools, it becomes a learning disability. Anything you wanted to add?
So there are a lot of ways that, like, when we talk about neurotypical or non-neurotypical, that's basically just another way of saying the way that society thinks about people as normal or not normal, and those words normal and not normal are super bad.
Very stigmatizing.
And terms like neurodiversity evolved to try to do away with categorizing people as normal and not normal.
So one of the other things that comes with neurodiversity and acknowledging this is that we get things that don't just benefit people with specific diagnoses. One of the things we've really seen come into play with gaming in the community is normalizing the idea that everybody comes to the table with triggers. Everybody comes to the table with their own history and mental health history. So we incorporate things like safety mechanics. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with safety mechanics, but they're basically tools that you use at the gaming table that allows the players and also the GM to have some control over the content, whether it be, for me, I go into a game, one of my major things, I don't like any instances of a person being choked. I find that very upsetting. So beginning the thing, I throw that out as my line. If it comes up in game or it seems like it's going to come up, I might tap the X card. And these tools we've seen benefit not, you don't come to a table and give somebody your mental health history, but it allows everybody, regardless of that history, to have the control to play a game safely.
These are sort of meant to be like no questions asked mechanics. If you set up a line or a veil at the beginning of the game, a line is something that for you, a line is a hard stop. If you say, like, another personal example for me, a line for me is fire. I have some trauma related to fire, but people don't need to know that. I can just set that up as a line, and that says, if we come to a situation where like an out of control fire is involved, let's maybe not.
Yeah.
A veil is something that's a little bit more like, we can go into this, but I prefer to handle it as like a fade to black rather than fully describing the scene. And you're not the person who invokes a line or a veil, or even an X card or a pause or a rewind or a fast forward, isn't obligated to share with people the reason that they're doing that. It's just something that the expectation of using it is that it's something that'll be respected because it's a matter of safety and comfort for someone at the table, which is something that should be respected.
So what we would like to see happen, and is sort of part of the point of this panel, is that there are certain tools that would also help people who are neurodivergent at the gaming table. And it would be great to see some of these things and practices normalized the same way that safety mechanics have, as something that will benefit basically everybody at the table.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So this is starting to get into a little bit more of my specific experience as a neurodivergent person, both running and playing in games. The image that you're seeing right now on the screen is my favorite safety tool, not just as a general player, but as someone on the autism spectrum. I was diagnosed fairly late in life. At the point that I was diagnosed, what I was diagnosed with was called Asperger's, but that term has largely kind of gone out of use in a lot of circles. Now it's just understood as being on the autism spectrum. And one of the things that means for me is that I have a lot of difficulty with social cues. This isn't going to be everyone's experience. I can't pretend to speak for all people on the autism spectrum in the same way that I can't pretend to speak for all trans people. No one is going to be the perfect model of everyone's experience. But the part of my experience that really comes into play with role-playing games, no pun intended, is the recognizing social cues, which I have a tremendous difficulty with. And that can really kind of bog you down when it comes to playing role-playing games, especially. An area that I've really struggled with this is recognizing when an opening in a conversation is available to me. If a scene is going on, people are playing their characters, and it's no one else's fault. Like, I'm not blaming anyone for this. I just can't necessarily recognize when it's my opportunity to speak. So if I have an idea, I might not vocalize it. But if you have this in front of you, if you have this rewind, pause, fast forward mechanic there, I can just tap the pause button and say, hang on, I've got an idea. Can we like circle back a second? Which is really helpful.
We've also talked about some opportunities where this mechanic is really beneficial for a GM, because I think everybody who has ever GM'd has had a moment where the party starts to get away from the path that you've planned out, and some of us can't course correct that fast.
And that's an issue that I very much have. The example of this that I will cite for anyone interested is we have a gaming group that plays together regularly. As we've said, a lot of the people in that gaming group are non-neurotypical themselves. And we were playing a game of Edge of the Empire, a Star Wars role-playing game wherein our cast of outcasts and aliens piloted a ship around the galaxy, which might sound vaguely familiar to some of you. And we were setting up, I was running the game, setting up an information session, basically, where the crew of our ship, the Katarn, would be going to meet with one of their allies on the Outer Rim to get some information about what their next move was going to be. And we did a lot of world building around who this person was. The way I run games is that I want my players to have a personal connection with the story and with the NPCs. This kind of backfired on me this one particular time because there was a lot of iteration and discussion about who this NPC was to the players. And before I knew it, this person who I had designed to be a critical source of information and kind of their quest giver and the one who would send them after the next MacGuffin suddenly became someone that they couldn't be in the same room with without a firefight breaking out, which was not really what I had in mind. And I didn't have this mechanic on the table in front of me at the time. I didn't have pause or rewind or fast forward available to me. And so what kind of ended up happening was the whole thing sort of snowballed out of control. And I said, okay, well, we're gonna do not that. And let's have an adventure with Minoc Man instead. Which ended up being fun, but it would have been, again, this would have been a situation where for me, for a person for whom I don't process things as quickly or as easily as like a neurotypical person would. So for me, having the ability to hit pause, rewind, let's reassess that lore we just stumbled into, would have been really helpful for me, not just as a non-neurotypical person, but as a GM too. This is something that can be incredibly helpful for people on all ends of the spectrum to help with their gameplay.
My favorite experience with this mechanic was at Gen Con last year. I was in on a game of Velvet Generation, which was in beta. It was a game that I played at Metatopia and then was really excited to play at Gen Con to see it more finished. Highly recommend it if you can find it. And I was playing with a group of complete strangers, and we put this out and we were all having a great time, but we as a group used this to say, like, when we had a moment where like there's a bit and somebody thinks of a funny one-liner that they could have done in that moment and you passed it, rewind, say that one-liner. Or for me, as someone with ADHD and a minimum of impulse control, sometimes I would say something and be like, oh wait, that's really stupid, can I do that again? And the whole table was just rapid fire using this mechanic. As we were developing our characters for the first time, you know, we all got pre-made character sheets as you do as a con, and we didn't really know how to sort of riff on each other the way you do when you're a long established party, and it made the game so much more enjoyable because if you did something socially awkward or something that was a little weird or something that you maybe accidentally talked over somebody, you could pause and go back and fix that thing. And I really liked it, and I want to see it used more in that way, not just as a safety mechanic, but as something that assists with gameplay for people who might not, who need that extra assistance in having that interaction.
And it's important to note, I will say there is a caveat there, and that is that this tool specifically, the pause and rewind and fast forward function, the rewind function isn't meant to be used as like a Prince of Persia, I missed that jump, let's rewind and take it back. This isn't the kind of thing that you would use if you like failed a skill check. This is the kind of thing that's it's more of like this is a storytelling mechanic rather than a gameplay mechanic in a lot of ways.
You can't fix that Nat one. So this was something that was just very helpful. So the group, I have a limited GM experience, and we can turn this off or I can just go to the next one. I have limited GMing experience. A lot of the GMing that I do is for the 4 ladies that I work with. And all of them have some kind of neurodevelopmental disability. So something like autism, something like ADHD, Down syndrome, and we have, in addition to that, you have the different intellectual levels. So different levels of understanding of verbal ability. So when I'm running a game for them, it's a little bit different than when I'm playing a game with my home group. One of the main differences is I know I'm working with a very short attention span. If I'm going to play this, and I'm also playing it at work where the constraints of my shift and the daily routine come into play, I know that I've probably got to sandwich this between dinner and then the time that I have to assist them with getting ready for bed. So micro games are my best friend. And I think micro games, so underrated in any circumstance. But if you're going in and you're running a one shot for people who have, or running a game to get people interested in role playing, you don't want something with a lot of crunch, especially when those people might have varying reading levels. Because that is something that is in consideration. One of the individuals that I game with at work cannot read. So I need to make sure that everything is going to be accessible for her. So I want something I can sit down and I can play in one sitting. And I want something that's pretty rules light, easy to understand. So the first game that I ever played with them was Dread, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with this game, but the main mechanic is a Jenga tower. And this is something that we've played with our home group a few times. It's great. Our GM has given me nightmares. It tends to be a horror game, but you can dial down the horror depending on your audience. So we played Dread. And then I had the additional factor that day of having somebody who has fine motor difficulties, which is something I have a little bit of myself, but she had severe tremors. So we had to hack Dread. Not only did I have to simplify the rules for her, but we had to be flexible. So what I did for her was I got a D20, and she had the option. I didn't want to limit her. And when you're running games for people of various abilities, it is important not to limit them and to let them have the choice or the option of how they want to play. So for her, I just had a D20 and she could roll it, but the number that she had to beat increased just the same way that the difficulty of the Jenga tower increases as the game continues. And we had an absolute blast. The other game that I played with them that worked really well, we played, do you have my notes? Just I want to remember who did this game.
I do.
We've played micro games like The Witch is Dead by Rowan, Rook, and Deckard, which is, again, one-page RPG. You are a witch's familiar who has to avenge her after she's killed. We kind of hacked it because it was supposed to be a one-player game, but we increased it. We played The Mustang. And like anything that you can literally explain the rules as you're going. Now we have it on the table to have some more complicated games. One of the ladies really wants to play Edge because she's a huge Star Wars. We are very big on Star Wars in this house. And it's great. I basically get to go and hang out with a bunch of nerds for a living. That's my job. So we will eventually be working up to that. But as I'm running Edge for them, with us, when we sit down at our table, usually we try to, you want to know the rules at the beginning for the most part. I'm the person who cannot remember the rules. I am the Clint McElroy slash whatever of our party. Like you are going to have to remind me a dozen times. And one of the things I feel like would work in a longer campaign with people with intellectual disabilities is you don't start with all the rules at once. I'm going to teach a game the same way I teach a life skill, where we're going to keep it simple. And then as we go and as you improve, I'm going to add complexity. So if you do want to play a more complicated game, it might be good to build in difficulty and add rules as you go and just not worry about some of them at the beginning.
That's definitely what we did when we first started out with the Edge of the Empire game that I was running, which again, we ran it in a very story heavy way. But for me, part of my particular brand of autism is that I like rules. I like structure, but too much of them at once will also overwhelm me, and it will overwhelm a lot of people. So we didn't go into the campaign say like, okay, so here are the rules for ground combat, here are the rules for space combat, here's like X, Y, and Z. We didn't get into all that nitty gritty stuff. I actually, this is a true story. As the GM, I actively avoided encounters that would result in space combat with the players because I didn't want to learn the rules because I thought they were too complicated. We literally did not get into space combat until they forced my hand.
Which was probably good because I don't know that I still know the rules of space combat. So it was really great for me to get the hang of things as we were going, and just, eventually once it came time to know space combat, I got some time to learn. I got my one section of space combat. I was the ship's mechanic. So I got, actually, Edge of the Empire has ability card. Like, you can buy a deck of cards for each class that has all of your abilities and moves and stuff, and you can just make a little deck that you can keep for quick reference. That was hugely helpful for me because I can't remember what my character can do half the time. I love the way that the Fantasy Flight game sheets are set up. It's very helpful to me, but also getting those little individual cards with the details of my move sets and what dice I needed to use was very helpful. The other tool that was super, super helpful for me when I started playing Edge was I went and I got the Fantasy Flight game Star Wars app. And that app is great. And I don't know if they have one for, you could basically use the same thing if you were playing a Genesis game, which is their system agnostic game. But I could go in before the game and preset each ability and what my dice were for that ability, so that as I'm playing, I don't necessarily need to figure this out. I can just look at the app. I did not actually know how stats related to dice until I went and I played, after playing Edge for 2 years, I went and played a game of Genesis at a Gen Con, and somebody explained to me, no, your dice pool is your skill level, and then your help me out here.
Oh boy, it's been a while.
Words. When you take ranks in it, that ups it to the yellow. That's how it works. So I ups it to a yellow die. I had been playing for 2 years and I did not know that because I had been using a digital sheet that just visually put what my dice pool was next to every move, which was helpful. But this just shows, things that are very logical and make sense to everyone else and is really easy to grasp. For me, it's not that intuitive. So it was great to have extra tools to really help me out until I just had that moment, and figured that out.
Like, we don't necessarily think of things like digital dice rollers or like ability decks as accessibility tools, but they totally are, because even, the sheets for Edge are set up well. The sheets for D&D are generally set up well. A lot of games have great character sheets, but that might not be easy for everyone to parse. So having ways to like break it down into its simplest components is really important for getting everyone at the table kind of on the same page.
I beg to differ about D&D character sheets, but I wish I had a link that I could include. Somebody did make a really visual layout of a D&D character sheet that I looked at, and it just took a lot of the head work out of me. One of my favorite adaptive tools that I use in every game, like I said, I have some fine motor issues. I also have some visual impairment. I have some large print dice that are massive. You can see these are huge. They're real hard for me to accidentally roll off the table. I can aim with them. So these are great. These are great for people who might have issues gripping smaller dice. There's also you can get dice that are in Braille. And if you want to know more about this, there's a really excellent, I think it's the first episode of the Modifier podcast that Megan Dornbrock did with, oh, I'm absolutely blanking on her name. Anyway, the first episode was on gaming as somebody who is visually impaired. And Megan mentioned large print dice. I got super excited. I found them when I was at Gen Con. I showed them to Megan, and her response was, "Oh my God, you could use those as a weapon," which I haven't tried yet, but these are my faves.
Yeah, I think the D20 I think does 1d4 bludgeoning damage as a thrown weapon.
Yes.
So it's not a lot, but it's something.
So I guess this is a good time to segue into cons.
Yes. Con experiences, especially for people with
and actually we're going to stop the screen share because I think that's our last slide. Is that our last? That is our last slide.
That is our last slide.
Sorry to interrupt.
So con experiences can be a really fraught thing for a lot of people with on the autism spectrum or with other sort of non-neurotypical processes. Anyone who has ever been to Gen Con and had a game on the field at Lucas Oil Stadium knows what a hectic experience that can be. You know, you are down there on the field, things are going on all around you. And the thing in my particular mix of autism that affects me more than anything else is processing. If I'm in an environment like that, auditory processing specifically, yeah. If I'm in an environment like that, people can be talking to me and it'll all just in one ear and out the other, because there's just too much going on around me for me to kind of filter out the signals effectively and be able to determine what's important for me to listen to and what's not. So in some ways, that is the biggest thing that shapes especially my con experience. And in a lot of places, the work hasn't really been done to make places accessible for people with auditory processing disorders. It's starting to happen, which is really great to see. You know, a lot more cons are offering like kind of quiet cool down places where if you get overstimulated, if you sort of get to that point where you've had too much sensory input and you kind of get overloaded, you can go to calm down and reprocess that. I also want to give a very particular shout out to Double Exposure. They are an organization that runs a couple of smaller cons every year. They run DexCon in July, they run Metatopia in November, and they run Dreamnation in February at the Hyatt Regency in Morristown. And they go out of their way to make sure that people are comfortable. I ran a game that I designed at Metatopia 2 years ago, and as part of the conversation with them when we were setting up, you know, what are your requirements for space, what are your requirements for the events that you're going to be running, they made sure that since I have these auditory processing disorders, since I'm on the autism spectrum, that I would have a quiet, private room to play where my group would be the only one in the room. And that was so helpful for me. You know, if you're in a situation where you've got something that you've worked on, that you've put a lot of effort into, but you can't really process the feedback that people are giving you because there's too much sensory input, it's not going to be really worth your time even to do it. And that, like, just having that experience was so great. it really kind of changed the whole landscape of the con for me. So huge shout out to Double Exposure and to Avenel for making that kind of thing happen.
Yeah, Avenel at Double Exposure and that whole crew. And I remembered the person that I wanted to shout, who did the podcast episode with Megan Dornbrock, just to hit the rewind button. Elsa, I cannot pronounce her last name, but she's Snarkbat on Twitter, and she is deafblind and constantly working on advocacy and accessibility, not just within the gaming community, but the wider community as well. And she was the one in that episode on vision impaired gaming. Something else that I've really experienced with cons, and I've started taking the ladies that I work for to conventions. They love it. They're kind of disappointed that like the rest of us, that con season is canceled. One of the things that is very much a barrier for them to go to conventions, not just cost, but they have to pay admission for a caregiver. So we get a limited budget for their house, for rec, for groceries, for their meals out, for everything. And from that budget will come paying for staff to do anything. So when we're going to a convention, they simply cannot go without somebody to support them. And I would love to see support staff as conventions seen as basically, we are the adaptive tech, and that person needs to have that adaptive tech with them. So it would be really beneficial if the option existed at conventions not to charge admission for caregivers, if we're going with the individuals we serve. Because at the end of the day, that's how these people are going to get in there, is they're going to need, some of them will need I jokingly call myself the Uber driver, and, they're going to need that assistance. So I would love to see that be normalized. At the same time, I think what is also needed in the convention scene is a little bit of education for how to treat adults with cognitive disabilities, the same stigmas that exist in the rest of the society. For example, treating them as perpetual children. They are the adults. They're who you should talk to. If I need to chime in with anything, I will. But if they are there, they should be treated just like anybody else. Also, normalizing at game tables, if somebody does have a cognitive disability or a reading disability, definitely being flexible about letting them and their staff play as a team, sharing a character. And one of my favorite experiences that was just not really related to this was I ended up having to team up with somebody at actually, this is just a sidetrack. I'm going to hit rewind. We don't need that sidetrack. Sorry. So it's normalizing that. Normalizing also people being able to bring in outside food. I work with a lot of diabetics, and I always need them to be able to bring in their outside food all the time. I think that's a big accessibility point with convention spaces. Access to convention spaces. If a specific event is that, and that at that convention is not wheelchair accessible, for the love of God, list that, so that people don't get their hopes up, get there, and then realize, no, I cannot get into that panel. Because if it is not, and please don't leave. A lot of people will say, well, oh, we'll carry you in, or we'll help you into, we will make it accessible. That is not safe. Don't do that. You will, that having as much information as possible about the accessibility of an event and publishing that on the website, I guess, is what I'm coming to. Because the more information that a person has who is going to have to take extra steps to navigate this event, the more information that's available to them, the better they're going to be able to plan their con experience.
And make information available ahead of time. That's always the big thing, let people know that there might be some challenging things if that's going to be part of the game. you know, being transparent with content is just as important about being transparent with safety kind of stuff. I'm going to soapbox for a hot second and say tag fire when you're tagging trigger warnings, just as a personal favor. But making sure that everybody is equipped before they come to the game about what they should expect going into it.
And give the person, have a contact. If you can have somebody whose job it is to answer questions about accessibility, to provide information, to be a liaison, or there's just somebody who can handle that in addition to their other responsibilities, please make that available on your website. It's sometimes we've got to send questions, and it's going to be having a dialogue and having that kind of transparency and stuff would just be very helpful. What time is it?
It is 3:36.
Oh, okay. So we're actually right on target.
So let's talk a little bit about what you can actively do to support neurodivergent people at your gaming table, to make them feel really included and part of it and not like singled out. And the biggest thing that, like, anytime you get advice about running a tabletop game, this is what people hit you over the head with, is communication.
Mm-hmm.
Always communicate. Always, always, always. The biggest thing you can do to support people on the autism spectrum, people with, developmental disabilities of any kind, is to check in with them. If a player has been sitting there quiet for a little while, say, hey, how's it going? What's going on? You doing okay? Do you have anything that you want to add? Just like check in.
Yeah.
That's the biggest single thing you can do, is just to make sure that everyone at your table is comfortable, is on the same page, and that will just improve the experience, not just for that person, but for all of your players, like, tremendously.
I think that there are certain parts of games that are fantastic where you have a specific turn structure, like in combat, where everybody is going to get equal time. Everybody is going to have a moment where they do their thing. The more social sides of games, a lot of times you will have a couple of people doing the talking and one or two people who don't necessarily know how to break in. And if you haven't heard from somebody for a while, as a GM, you can absolutely start asking questions about that situation. So what is your character doing right now? Just move that camera onto them and create that opportunity for them to contribute.
Which, like, that can be a really hard thing to do. And that's okay. It's hard to sometimes have to take a step back and say, this player has talked a lot. Why don't we talk to this player for a little while?
You might not even need to acknowledge that this player has. I mean, if you can do it skillfully, I don't have a subtle bone in my body, but if you can just subtly turn that scene, it's very helpful.
If you are a player playing with people who are on the spectrum or anything like that, that's within your power too. You can check in with them and make sure that they're doing okay. The GM especially will appreciate that if you check in with them.
Yeah.
Like, hey, how's it going, buddy? How's this thing that you wrote for us holding up?
Do we need 5 minutes for you to recalibrate? Do we need to take a snack and bio break so that you can sit down and review your notes and untangle this horrible mess that we just
stat out a few new NPCs, come up with some new character voices, just do
you need a sack?
Just like making sure that everyone at the table has the time and space to process and calibrate for whatever is going on is the single biggest thing you can do to make someone feel welcome at your table, whether that person is on the spectrum or not.
Another thing that is extremely helpful for me, I'm a fidgeter. Like I said at the beginning, I do not sit still well. understanding that for some people, you know, if they're going to be playing and they're not rolling a ton of dice, maybe getting up and walking around is going to be helpful for them.
True story. When I was GMing Edge of the Empire, I would get up and pace around while I was delivering speeches in characters like Paul Bettany in A Knight's Tale.
It's great. But also that was helpful for her. One of my most welcome I've ever felt at a table was my first Gen Con, last game of the day of the entire weekend. We ended up at a table with Meg Dornbrock and a bunch of the Tabletop Squad people. And Meg pulled out a bag of embroidery thread and friendship bracelet making supplies and says, hey, if anyone needs to fidget, these are for you. And I was so happy, like, because sometimes, you know, I don't want to be rude if I've got, you know, Candy Crush going on my phone because I need to be moving my fingers while I'm to focus. Like that's not me being rude. That is just I need to be multitasking. And suddenly here's some friendship bracelets and some supplies for me so that I can fidget, and it's just been totally made clear that that's acceptable. I think I made friendship bracelets for a bunch of people at the table. It was really fun. But doing that, sometimes I bring crocheting to the table. Not everybody is going to be sitting still. And if they aren't, that doesn't mean they're not paying attention. That just might mean that this is how they function best. Another thing that I wanted to bring up, when you've got people on the autism spectrum, you've got fidgeting, you've got stimming. So you might have people moving their hands a lot. You know, sometimes you see this motion, or spinning is another common, or fidget cubes. Gotta love them. They were the most normalized fidget cubes, and fidget spinners are like the most normalized spinning has ever gotten. I mean, stimming has gotten. It's great. That's just going to be a normal thing that somebody does to, you know, regulate themselves. That's just a habit that is passive and is soothing and comfortable to that person. Just ignore it. It's going to be them doing their thing, and that's pretty normal. It might not be normal in terms of what you see every day, but it's normal for that person. Another thing that you might get is scripting. So for some of the ladies that I work with and people on the spectrum, there might be certain phrases that they repeat, certain sounds or vocalizations, and just things that's going to come out. And you know what? That's their normal. And having that happen and just kind of moving on and having that be a natural thing that's normal for them is what's going to make them feel comfortable. If they're doing it a lot, I find that the best thing to do is to engage them in conversation, because that sort of changes that thing. But again, that's kind of a normal thing that you see for people on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, I have a vocal tic where I will suddenly loudly hiccup every now and then. And that's just something that the people that we play with know about me, and they know that it's going to happen, and it's going to sound like a pterodactyl, and it's just going to be a moment and it'll be done. Giving people a chance to really think over their words, to like not trying to jump in and finish people's sentences, which is A, just like good manners, but B, it really helps. Like, I know for me, I really need to make sure when I open my mouth that what I'm saying is right. And I will spend a lot of time obsessing over how I've put my words and my sentences together, and then we'll spend the next half hour after I've said it beating myself up for my poor word choice. But like, if someone's taking their time to express something, or is maybe thinking through things or talking through things a little slowly, just giving them that space to have their process, to let it work, and to maybe backpedal a little bit and say, no, that's not what I meant to say, or that's not how I meant to say that, or my character's charisma score is so much higher than this. Why did she just do that?
I'm very nervous. I'm about to play a high charisma character, and I have no filter and no charisma. So I'm going to be using that rewind button a lot.
It really is like, the X card and lines and veils are super important, and I'm so glad that they're catching on, but like that pause and rewind and fast forward, those are my favorite tools as a person on the autism spectrum who plays games. And I like really encourage people to incorporate those into their games.
What time check?
It is 3:45.
3:45. Do we want to open up the field to questions?
Yeah, I have the Twitch chat open here. So if anyone has any questions, anything they want to know about this kind of thing, just pop them in the Twitch chat and we'll answer them as they come up.
Were there any that came up while we were going? Did you notice?
No, I do. I want to shout out the cheerleaders that we've had in chat. We are so glad that you came in and listened to our panel and listened to us talk. And
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Yeah, if you have any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we can just faff about for 15 minutes. But, oh, thank you. It says you too rock. That's very good.
Oh.
Okay, so what would you recommend is a good starting game for playing with neurodivergent players?
So in addition to the micro games, I am a huge Powered by the Apocalypse fan. One of my longest running games, Monster Hearts. I'm representing my Ghoul Pride with my t-shirt, but because you can go into a Powered by the Apocalypse game and it's a lot less crunchy. You don't have to add anything up higher than 13 usually, which I like. But from there, you can branch out to so many other games, from Monster of the Week to superhero one. Masks.
Yeah.
To that, I think that having a system that is simple, that is story-based, and that can tap into some special, like if you can build on the interests of your players, is really great. Also, if you're going with somebody who is completely new to role-playing and you just want them to start off with, to get used to the act of storytelling in character, any of For the Queen and any of the Descended from the Queen games are really great. A few weeks ago, I ran Doing the Job, which is a Descended from the Queen game that Jeff Stormer wrote about professional wrestlers. And basically, you have the situation, you have questions asked of your character about the wrestling event, and how does your character and your wrestling persona feel about the champion that you're slated to lose to at this wrestling event. And it's a great way to focus on creating characters and telling stories without having to get bogged down in too many rules.
Yeah. Yeah, something like a Powered by the Apocalypse game is great just for its versatility.
Yeah.
I mean, once you learn Powered by the Apocalypse, there are so many options out there and people are creating new ones every day.
When I go to cons, I specifically, because I used to have a lot of anxiety about being that person who bogged down the table at a convention, playing a game I've never played before, because I don't understand the rules and I need things explained to me 50 times. So for a long period of time, I would stick to just Powered by the Apocalypse games. And that really opened what I could play. Genesis is helpful now because you can, people are making more settings for that. And once you know Edge of the Empire, you know Genesis. It's the same thing with, some of the movesets are different and you're not always in space.
Yeah.
Movesets. That's my Powered by the Apocalypse brain abilities.
Yeah, I think that's a really great starting point, honestly, for people who are just like looking to dive into some role-playing kind of stuff. I do also want to plug the Quiet Year.
Oh yeah, I had that on my slide too.
Because that's what the Quiet Year does that I really love is it pushes kind of like collaborative world building and character building, and it's a lot less like there are basically no broad mechanics with the Quiet Years. There's like turns till projects complete and a couple of other things, but really that's it. So anything that's like in a pure story base like that is really good, and I just love the way that the Quiet Year does it. So Okay. From Hudson, are there games out there designed with plots revolving around neurodiversity themes? Are there any games that do this and get it wrong?
I know that Jason, is it Petre? Anyways, he had a game, Circles of Power, that he was working on that I test played at Metatopia, and I attempted to run, but it was definitely in a very unfinished state, and I'm not I wasn't an experienced enough GM to compensate for that. But one of the themes in that game is that there is you're playing as people from different marginalized backgrounds, and one of the options was as some kind of person with a disability. And the game, I think Jason, last time I looked at it, and it's been a few years, so I don't know how it's evolved since then. It needed some work and consultation from people from those marginalized communities for that game to grow. So I hope that it is improved. I know that it was made in good faith with a desire to make a game that could educate and help you put yourself in that position. But as a game to be played by marginalized people, and in the state that I last saw it, it needed some work to succeed in a goal that would actually be fun for marginalized people to play.
Mm-hmm. There are also a lot of games out there which don't explicitly say they're dealing with marginalized themes, and especially neurodiverse themes, but will use neurodiverse people as kind of a prop, or use some sort of like supernatural thing as analogy for a neurodivergence in a really kind of squicky way.
It's not a tabletop game, but you see a lot of people talk about Anders in the Dragon Age franchise as a metaphor for a person with bipolar disorder, mm-hmm. or other issues. I'm like, no, just put in a person with that. You don't need a magical allegory for that thing. Mm. Monster Hearts, as we play it, has become such a metaphor for all of our mental health issues. I think that's something more inherent in the people playing it than necessarily a part of the game. But I mean, Monster Hearts is all about marginalization and queerness, and there's a huge overlap in at least the gender spectrum side of the queer community and the autistic community. I mean, you could probably speak to that more than me, but it's something that goes hand in hand. Yeah, and it's, oh, you know what? Elsa, who I mentioned before, whose last name I still cannot pronounce, and I apologize. There was a Fate, an expansion to the Fate core rulebook, specifically designed with disabled people in mind. And I believe they also touched on, neurodivergence in that.
Okay, are there any resources you recommend for better learning how to create neurodiverse spaces?
Give me a moment, because I was thinking of this earlier. Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. Thank you. There it is. Okay, mm-hmm. So the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, they're kind of the pinnacle of the expression, the phrase "nothing about us without us." They have a website. They post a lot of articles, a lot of information. National Adapt, as well. It deals with physical disabilities as well as developmental and intellectual disabilities. They focus on people with those specific disabilities, writing about their experiences. I use a lot of their articles in the human rights curriculum that I do for the ladies that I serve. And they're fantastic. Honestly, there are so many bloggers and gamers out there writing about this experience. There's a lot. There's a lot out there.
And again, if you have any questions like specific to your table and the players who are at your table, ask. That's the biggest thing you can do, is to say to your players, neurodiverse or otherwise, what's going to make you comfortable at this table and what can we do to support you in this environment.
I think too, there's probably been a couple of Modifier episodes about this too. So Modifier podcast is good.
Yeah, Modifier podcast with Megan Dornbrock is an incredible resource for any kind of like running games, modifying games to accommodate people of all levels of disability.
Or just hacking them for fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's see. We've run out of questions.
We've run out of questions.
We've run out of questions.
I could plug a few organizations. If you wanted to get involved in reaching out and getting people involved in your conventions or in running games, one of the things that I see the ladies that I work with really struggle with is jobs. They love conventions. I think that they would really enjoy being involved, not just in the going to conventions, but volunteering or working at convention spaces. And again, I am a huge fan of the saying, nothing about us without us. If you want your cons to be accessible and have events for people with neurodivergence, reach out to them. Reach out to local organizations. The ARC is an organization that has group homes, day programs, and residential and recreational events, and they're all over the United States. I don't know too much about what goes on in other countries and organizations there, but reaching out to the ARC to either plug events that you're having or ask for or discuss opportunities to get people involved in cons or volunteer to run games. The ARC is fantastic. Googling just your local recreational programs for adults with developmental disabilities. Also, if you know anybody working in this field, we're all going a little crazy right now because our residents are social distancing and in quarantine, and we're running out of rec ideas. So if anybody wants to run a game via Zoom for some people, hit me up, or other people in this field, because we would appreciate more things for people to do.
And there's a link to the ARC now in the Twitch chat.
Oh,
so if anyone
sweet.
is really interested in that, check that out. It's a great resource.
They're great. What else? I want to do a plug for Special Olympics. Special Olympics is a fantastic organization for building confidence and recreation and skill sets for adults and kids with developmental disabilities. They're also a program that has been at risk of losing funding. Betsy DeVos last year, I believe, initially was pushing to remove the portion of funding for them that comes from the federal government. And as you know, I'm a caregiver or professional caregiver for two Special Olympians, one whom is a figure skater. A lot of their fundraising events have been canceled due to COVID. Their annual polar plunge was canceled, so they are a group that could really use some monetary support. They could always use volunteers.
And I think that will about do it for us. We thank you all so much for showing up and for watching and listening and for being our cheerleaders in the chat.
If you want to find us, I am, actually, if you want to type this into the chat, let me type it into the chat because it's got some weird dashes.
Yeah, let me,
yeah, pass that on over.
I'll pass that.
Well,
not onto the screen.
I'm sorry. I am on Twitter. I am hold on. I cannot spell.
So yeah,
I am Hyatt No Wiz on Twitter.
That's Melissa's Twitter handle there. If you want to find me not producing content on Twitter, I am at ElfEars88. If you want to find me not producing content here on Twitch, I am at Briony Russell, BrionYRussell. So if you're interested in seeing all the things I don't do, you can follow up with me there.
I also have a coffee account. You can look up Melissa DeGenova, or I believe it's coffee/Pearl Street. If you type in Pearl Street, that's a project of mine that I am transitioning away from. But as we are a couple, anything you donate to that coffee will support both of us. Always.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. I hope we gave you some food for thought.
Thanks to the Tabletop Squad crew for hosting everything and letting us be a part of everything this really awesome weekend. The Sheevan Theodore Palpatine Hour is up next, where the squad is going to yell about Star Wars' favorite emperor for 90 minutes. So watch that here on Twitch, and your journey towards the dark side will be complete. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being with us.
Bye.